Okay, welcome to another episode of Syntax. So today we're going to just build something. We're going to look at just building a very simple clock to display on a web page. So we'll get right to it. I just have a JavaScript file here, empty JavaScript JS file, and this is the same index file we had from last episode, except I've just added these two very simple h1, h2 tags with ID of clock and time. So we can make a display clock function, and again, make a function in new ES6 syntax. Const is what you use to set this function to a variable. It's not going to take any arguments, so it's empty parens there. And we're going to return, we're going to say time is a new date. Date is a JavaScript object you get for free. And to grab elements from the DOM, the document object model, which is basically what this web page is, right? We're going to say document, and we're going to say get element. Look at that! It came up in my browser for a minute. Get element by ID, and we gave it that ID of clock, if you remember, in our HTML. So we gave the first h1 tag clock, so that's what we're going to send in right here. That'll grab us that element, and then we can set that inner HTML to equal that time that we set above. So if we did this right, oh, and of course we have to call this function. So now we've defined our function, set it to a variable. We're grabbing that element from our HTML and we're running it and displaying it. So this should work. And then you can open this up in any browser. And let's see, did we get an error? I cannot set property of inner HTML get element by ID. What did I do wrong here? Const time equals display. Cannot set property inner HTML of null. Oh, okay, I see. Yeah, so this is a common problem you'll see in JavaScript sometimes. The things haven't rendered on the page yet, so it hasn't actually drawn the elements of the app or of the HTML yet. So we can get around this by just wrapping this whole thing in a function. So I'm going to do that now. In other frameworks, as we get into maybe making code a little bit more interesting than these smaller, tiny applications, this stuff is kind of hidden from you, but you do have to wait for all of this stuff to run. So we're gonna have to wait for the whole DOM to be loaded. So you can say window on load equals app, and now it should work. There we go, and we have our clock. Now, of course, this looks a little gross, and one thing I'm noticing right off the bat is it stops. It doesn't refresh unless I refresh the page. So we can fix that with set interval, which is another JavaScript function you get for free. So with set interval just takes a function, and we can just pass in our display clock function and run that we want every second. So that's 1,000 milliseconds. And now when we run this thing, it's going to keep running. Now, of course, this is a somewhat inefficient code, right? If we look at this, we're doing this every second. Actually, you know what? Before I get into that, let's make this a little bit more interesting. Maybe we want to display a prettier clock. So with JavaScript, you can, what's really fun about it is you can play around with this stuff in the console. So if we set a new date here, t dot, and we can see there's other functions that we get from this object. So you can get hours, you can get day, and if you get day, you get this 1. Now why is it 1? Well, because today is Monday and a week starts on Sunday, which would be 0. So we can utilize this index that it's returning to get the days. So I'm going to show you that. I already have this written down here, so we don't have to worry. And let's go ahead and grab days and months. So you see here I just have an array of strings, which are the days of the week, starting with 0th element being Sunday, and the months of the year, again 0 being January, and so on. And so now that we have these, we can go ahead and say make this a little bit prettier. We can create maybe we'll call this a formatted date. So let's say format date. And of course, there's probably libraries out there like Moment.js and whatnot that do this for you. But the point here is to kind of get a handle on how JavaScript might work for you and how you can write it and how we can sort of expand on those data structures, data types that we learned in the video previous, as well as writing functions and getting familiar with it. So we can just break this apart, right? Like, let's get the day from days. Now that's going to reference our array above. And if we get that current time, we call get day on it, that's going to return that index. And we can just go ahead and see what this is going to look like. So you can interpolate a string like so. This is interpolation, where it will render this day variable inside of our string. And you need to use these weird backticks in JavaScript for a string that uses interpolation. And so if we go ahead and just render this format date, so instead of calling new date here, we'll do it here since we're doing that above. And we'll say format date. And that'll return that day to us. And now, of course, we're just going to get Monday. So let's keep going. We can go ahead and, we can do the rest of the days of the week. We can get date for the date. We can get the month. And that's going to be current time, get month. And this, of course, is going to return us another integer based on the index of the month. So we can call this inside of our brackets. Now this is going to use bracket notation. This will be an index given what month it is, and then it'll grab the month for us that we need from this array. And lastly, let's go ahead and get the year. And that's, now this one's a bit funky, but I'll go ahead and let it error out so you can see it. So if we have all these, we can maybe format it like so. Month with the date and what year. All right. So today is Monday, September 16th, the year of our Lord 119 AD. And of course, this threw me off a little bit, but apparently the latest JavaScript date object, when you call the getYear function, it returns a number that needs to be added to 1900. So we'll go ahead and do that here, but now you get a little arithmetic practice in your JavaScript writing, so hooray for that. So now we have our date. Now, I want to show you why this could use a little bit of refactoring, well, for many reasons. But so we are rendering this every second, but there are things that are not going to change every second, right? Oh, in fact, we need to render our time. We haven't done that yet, so we missed out on our time. But let me just continue this thread. So I'm going to log this to the console. I'm being called. And we'll see that it's going to be called over and over and over and over again. This ticker is just going to keep climbing because it's being called in that set interval every second. And yet we're not using the seconds. So we can format our time using the same sort of function that we wrote for the date. So again, this function doesn't take any arguments. We're going to set it to the variable. We're going to call the same date function and get a new date object. And I'm going to save us a little bit of time and just copy this over. But it's the same idea that we did earlier. So we have our hours, minutes, seconds. And now we're going to run this function and add this to our string. So we're returning hours, minutes, seconds, kind of in the format that it had before. And this time we're going to put this on our, I believe we called it time. On our time interval. So this will be const time, this will be date, and this will be time, and this needs to be date over here. All right. Oh, hello. Okay. Now we have our time, but we still have this problem where we're calling that other function every second, right? And in fact, this one is format date. I'm format date, and I'm being called, and this is format time. So I'm format time, right? So we want to just call this one once and call this one every second. So how do we do that, right? Well, we don't have to call this display clock function, doesn't need to call the time inside of itself, right? So we can just have this guy run outside of the scope of this other function. So scope is something I haven't really dove too deep in lately, but since this is being called outside of this function here, it'll just be called once as this file renders, or however many times we call this function, which is once. So we call it once, this date object and all this data that's being returned in this format date here will not change until we refresh the page, and it won't change until tomorrow. So this will get set to date, and it'll live inside here and keep getting set to this. But you'll see now we're only calling format date once, and we are of course calling format time over and over again to get the incremental seconds. So that's pretty much all I had. Oh, well, we can do a little bit more, like, to keep going on our array thread that we had before. If we I wanted to show just a few other things. Like, let's pretend we wanted to make all of these 3 letters just the abbreviated months. Now, of course, you can just call an array method here where we just say, okay, we're going to map over all of these months and pass in a function. So the function is going to look like this. We pass a function to map, and the argument that is, this can be anything, right? We can, this is just a variable that denotes each item in the array, but for our sake, it is a month. So we'll say, give us the month. Now, of course, we can omit these parentheses since it's just one argument, and you can omit the curly braces here as well, because we're just going to return each month, and we're going to say, you know what, just slice that month by 3. So this is a slice function on a string. So we're using a map function on an array, which is our months, and a slice function on the string. And the slice is just saying at the 0th index, which is the first character of the string, give me 3 characters. So if we do that, we're going to shorten our time back to September just to be Sep, right? Monday, September 16th. So of course, now this is silly. You wouldn't really need to do this because you can just do this once in an abbreviate function. So if you abbreviate and we say we give it a time, maybe we say the same thing where we have months, and we're going to get that month, and after we've gotten it back, then we want to slice, and now we don't need this. And of course, you could just have these months actually be abbreviated into 3s, but the idea here is to get a little bit more comfortable with array methods and string methods. And in JavaScript you'll see these a lot. You'll use slice and map. In most languages you'll use map a lot. So if we do this, then we can abbreviate our time right here. So we don't need to call this. And now we'll just pass in our current time to this abbreviate function. So time get month is not a function, so of course, wait, what are we doing wrong here? Time is not a function. There's current time. Get month. Oh, I didn't spell it right. It's capital M. Capital M. There we go. So, that's pretty much it in a nutshell. The goal here was to show you how you can write a little app yourself. It doesn't do much. It just displays the date and time, but you should be proud because now, you understand how arrays work, how data can be structured, how you can manipulate that data if you want certain aspects of your code to work a certain way. And, of course, we don't need these guys anymore. And, how to be more efficient, how to call code once and only once if you only need it to be run once, and how to use a set interval to call it many times. So hope you enjoyed that. That's just a little bit of JavaScript and encapsulating functions and using data structures to make a little app. So thanks for watching. Bye-bye.